My coworkers called me the office assistant. They smiled as they handed me coffee, passed me notes to print, and praised me in public, only to erase my name from the project pitch hours before it was unveiled. They wore my ideas like tailored suits, strutted into the boardroom on the backbone of my research, and laughed behind closed doors about how easy it was to make me disappear. But while they were celebrating with champagne and camera-ready smiles, I was busy with something else. Not revenge, not rage, just a plan. Quiet, surgical, undeniable. Because the real presentation hadn't started yet, and they had no idea whose name was coming next. They called me the office assistant. Said it with a smile that didn't quite reach their eyes, like it was a compliment, like I should be grateful. But I wasn't hired to fetch coffee or reorder printer ink. I was the one who built the foundation of our company's most ambitious project. The data framework, the presentation arc, the entire predictive model that made our pitch irresistible. I didn't just contribute, I created. From the very first whiteboard sketch to the polished visual layout, my fingerprints were on everything. And yet, hours before we stepped into that boardroom, my name disappeared. Not from one document, from all of them. They stripped it off the credits, the internal memo, even the project email chain. I was told there had been a last-minute change, that I'd be more useful assisting remotely, troubleshooting in case the slides glitched. No spotlight, no seat at the table, not even a chair in the corner of the room, just a folding desk by the IT station and a courtesy badge that read, Support Staff. I watched from a side monitor as they presented my research. I recognized every insight, every graph, every phrasing, even the pause before the punchline. I had written that too. They paraded my work like it was theirs, nodding as if they'd spent weeks laboring over the logic. But I didn't feel rage in that moment. I didn't feel grief. What I felt was silence. A heavy, cutting kind of silence. The kind that sits still just long enough to choose its moment. Because when I saw them up there, basking in praise they hadn't earned, I didn't burn. I focused. I looked at them, smiled faintly, and whispered to myself, "You stole from the wrong woman." I didn't interrupt, I didn't cry, but I wasn't finished. If you've ever been erased from your own work, you know the silence that follows isn't quiet, it screams. Keep listening. Because what they did next, that's when my blood turned cold. They used to call me a key player, a collaborator, a quiet genius. At least, that's what they said when they needed my ideas. But somewhere between the second strategy session and the final presentation draft, their tone changed. Slowly, subtly, like rust on metal. First, my name was removed from the email thread discussing the client's expectations. Then, my data model was forwarded internally with someone else's initials attached. During team meetings, I would speak, only to be interrupted, corrected, redirected. My insights were good instincts, but not executive-ready. My slides were a great starting point, and then disappeared entirely, resurfacing under new authorship like I'd never existed. They kept smiling, though. They always smiled. Eventually, they gave me a new title. Not officially, of course. On paper, I was still the lead strategist, but in the day-to-day, I became logistics. Support. Can you double-check the printouts? Can you prep the meeting room? They asked if I wouldn't mind making sure everyone had water. You're just so organized, they said. I nodded. I smiled. I kept track of every word. It was the night before the pitch when I heard them. I had left my charger in the break room and doubled back after hours, expecting silence, but the light was still on, and they were there, laughing, champagne already open. I froze just outside the door. She actually thinks she helped. Poor thing. Let's just pray she doesn't crash the presentation like some delusional intern. No one corrected them. No one said my name. I didn't cry. That was the part that surprised me most. I didn't storm in, or scream, or fall apart on the cold hallway tiles. I just turned around and walked back to my desk. My heart was thudding. Yes, But it wasn't breaking anymore. It was beating differently, heavier, slower, focused. I had given them everything, my trust, my ideas, my time, and in return, they turned me into a ghost, an invisible shadow walking the halls of my own work. But I wasn't done haunting them. Not yet. At that point, they thought I was defeated, that I'd vanish like an outdated draft. But here's the part they didn't see coming. And neither will you. I returned to the office just after midnight. The building was empty, save for the dull hum of the vents and the occasional flicker of an overhead light that hadn't been changed in years. I didn't turn on the lamp at my desk. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where everything was. My fingers moved almost automatically, waking up the monitor, unlocking folders, opening files I hadn't touched in weeks. Files they thought I'd forgotten. But I never forget the things I build, especially when they're stolen from me. I sat in that chair, surrounded by silence and betrayal, and opened the original project folder, the one I created in the first 48 hours after the brief landed on our desk. Every dataset, every graph template, every draft of the visual framework, it was all there. But more than that, it was mine. I had embedded invisible watermarks inside the data models, a tiny algorithm string only I could trace. I had versioned every file with time-stamped logs on my cloud archive. Even the color palette, something they assumed was cosmetic, had been custom-coded by me, with metadata hidden in the layers. Not because I expected betrayal, but because I've always built like a scientist, with structure, with proof. I pulled up the emails too, the very first message suggesting the breakthrough idea, the one I sent, their replies, the early Zoom calls, including the one where I presented the full concept while they nodded silently, cameras off. I had a screen recording of that session, archived in a backup folder. I had everything. But I didn't call HR. I didn't scream into the void or threaten legal action. No. I began preparing for the pitch. Not their pitch, mine, the one they thought they could deliver without me. I mapped out exactly when and where I'd strike, what I would show, how I would make it so clean, so undeniable, that no one in that room could ever question what really happened. I wasn't confused. I wasn't delusional. And I damn sure wasn't dead. I was getting ready, quietly, precisely. Because if they were going to steal my work and call it brilliance, then I'd make sure the world knew whose brilliance it really was. Letting the assistant run tech support? Bold move. Especially when that assistant controls the show from backstage. Watch closely. This is where the curtain starts to burn. They assigned me to tech support for the presentation, just in case the projector failed or someone forgot their login. It was their final insult, wrapped in a fake smile and a condescending nod. "We trust you to be on standby," they said, as if I were the intern, not the architect of the very pitch they were about to deliver. What they didn't realize was that by sidelining me, they had given me exactly what I needed. Full administrative access to the presentation system. I smiled back and said nothing. Let them climb onto the stage built on lies. I was already waiting behind the curtain, holding the switch. When the Q&A began, they were confident, overconfident. The clients asked questions. My coworkers answered them with the poise of actors in a play they didn't write. The room hummed with nods and affirming murmurs, until the screen flickered. One extra slide appeared. Clean, white background, bold black letters. The title read, Intellectual Property Breach, Source Attribution, My Name. Below it, a chart, time-stamped drafts, code metadata, visual blueprints, side-by-side excerpts from my original documents, and the polished pitch deck they claimed as their own. It was surgical. I didn't need to narrate. The evidence spoke fluently in the language of hard truth. Even the logo watermark embedded in the corner, undetectable unless you knew where to look, was blown up for all to see. The room fell into a kind of silence that doesn't happen naturally. It was the silence of unraveling. My coworkers turned ghost white, their mouths opening but producing no sound. One of them leaned forward, as if to unplug the laptop. Too late. The slide had been mirrored to the client's private tablet too. Another tried to laugh it off, but even his voice cracked mid-word. No one looked at me. I didn't need them to. Because the point wasn't to scream, it was to end the lie. Swiftly, publicly, and without mercy. You're still with me? Good. Because that final slide? It wasn't the climax, it was just the knock on the door. What came after left a room full of executives speechless. The slide had barely faded when the room turned colder than any air conditioning could manage. A dozen heads slowly turned toward the projector, then toward the team standing in front of it, my team. Or at least, the team that had paraded my work like they had birthed it themselves. The client's representative, sharp suit, sharper stare, broke the silence first. Is this true? He asked, voice low but loaded. One of them, the one who always bragged about being the idea guy, stammered something inaudible. Another went sheet white, and then there was Nina, the polished presenter, mouth parted, eyes darting between the screen and the audience, looking for a script that didn't exist. I stepped in through the side door. Quiet, steady. No announcement, just the soft sound of my heels crossing the polished floor. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I placed a thick manila folder onto the glass conference table. It landed with a subtle thud, but its weight echoed louder than any accusation. Inside was everything: data logs, copyright certificates, voice memos, and annotated drafts with digital timestamps. Truth, sealed and signed. The CTO leaned forward, flipping open the cover. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Then he looked up, not at me, but directly at them. You've got 5 seconds to explain this, he said flatly. They didn't, because they couldn't. Behind me, a woman who once brushed past me, like I was furniture, whispered, "She planned this." And yes, I had. Every audience, every stolen credit, every time they dismissed me with a smile, I'd folded them into this moment like stitches in a wound waiting to be reopened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask for recognition. I simply sat in the corner of the room, watched the panic rise like smoke, and waited for the silence to do what no argument ever could. And it did. You think justice was served already? Oh no. I wasn't here just to expose them. I was here to etch my name into their memory, permanently. And I did. 1 week later, the official notice came down. They were suspended indefinitely, pending further investigation. Their names, once paraded around as rising stars, were now whispered with embarrassment and quickly removed from the company directory. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Because while they scrambled to find lawyers and salvage what was left of their reputations, I was already packing up my desk. The CTO had called me into his office just 2 days before, offering the newly formed role of Head of Strategic Data Development. An apology packaged as a promotion. I declined. Not out of spite, but because I had just signed with one of our fiercest competitors. A global firm that didn't just want my mind. They respected the fact that I had the spine to defend it. They didn't see me as the assistant. They saw the architect, the backbone, the warning shot. And yet, before I left, I allowed myself one moment of artistry. Not revenge, precision. At 7 a.m., sharp, every inbox in the company lit up with a single email from me. No subject line, no pleasantries, just an attachment titled Pitch Deck v Final Original by me.pdf. And beneath it, one line, 12 words long. I don't seek applause, just accuracy. No anger, no threats, no victory speech. Just the truth, polished and undeniable, sitting in their inboxes like a mirror they couldn't turn away from. I didn't watch the fallout. I didn't need to, because the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Revenge isn't about noise. Sometimes it's about walking away. With your head high, your inbox full of real offers, and your soul finally breathing. Want to see what freedom tastes like? Dandelion light poured through the kitchen window, turning the steam rising from my coffee mug into soft curls of gold. Outside, the early Seattle mist still clung to the trees, but the air was already shifting, gentler, fuller, promising something new. It had been 3 months since I walked out of that office for the last time. 3 months since I left behind the sharp corners of glass walls and voices that only echoed when they wanted something from me. Now, my mornings began with jazz humming from a vintage speaker, the scent of toasted sourdough drifting from the oven, and a blank page in my idea journal waiting patiently beside my cup. There were no emails flooding in, no meetings disguised as ambushes, no hushed whispers in the hallway as I passed. There was only peace. Peace, and the quiet sound of healing. I moved into a small house nestled between a row of evergreens. Nothing fancy, just enough space for a garden, a bookshelf that stretched to the ceiling, and a cat I named Mosaic because she looked like pieces of broken sky stitched together. My neighbors were kind in the way people who've been through things tend to be, soft-spoken, observant, and generous with silence. They brought me lavender from their yard, slices of peach pie wrapped in foil, and once, a stack of old vinyls from a box labeled 4 Rainy Days. But it wasn't the house that changed me. It was the work I chose next. I became a mentor. Not in any official capacity at first, just someone who answered emails from young women navigating the same kind of glass ceilings I had once bruised my head against. They came with their notebooks and nervous questions, with stories of being overlooked, interrupted, underestimated. I listened. I made tea. I told them what no one had told me when I started. You're not imagining it, and no, you're not too sensitive. You're simply too smart to be ignored forever. One of them, a bright-eyed intern from Detroit, sent me a message last week. Just one sentence, but it stayed with me. Thank you for showing me that silence can still be powerful. I sat with that for a while. Let it settle into my bones like warmth after winter. Then I wrote her back. Silence, when armed with truth, is never weak. Sometimes I speak that line aloud in the mornings, while the kettle boils. Not to remind myself, but to honor the version of me who needed to hear it years ago. The version who sat alone in an empty conference room, nursing invisible wounds. The version who stayed late to fix the code, who watched others take the stage and smile as if they'd earned it. I've grown herbs in my windowsill now. Basil, thyme, a stubborn mint that refuses to behave. I make my own pasta on Sundays. I'm not trying to prove anything anymore. I just like the way flour feels in my hands and how kneading dough reminds me that I still get to shape something from nothing. Some evenings, I'll walk down to the lake, notebook in hand. I don't always write. Sometimes I just watch. The water, the ducks, the way the trees shift in the reflection, depending on how the light moves. It reminds me that everything looks different from another angle. That stillness isn't emptiness. It's potential. No one asks me what I do anymore. They ask what I love, and I tell them stories, steam rising from fresh tea, mentoring a girl who just found her voice. My life now isn't loud, but it's full. And when people speak of justice, they often imagine courtroom speeches or dramatic revelations. But I've learned that sometimes justice is a garden blooming after you've cleared the weeds. Sometimes it's a home filled with music you picked for yourself. Sometimes it's a message from someone you've never met saying, "Because of you, I stayed." That's all I ever wanted. Not applause, just accuracy. While I was rebuilding, they were unraveling. Not with a bang, but with the slow erosion of reputation, relevance, and respect. Stay with me. This part? It's justice with a velvet glove. They didn't fall all at once. That's the thing about a collapse like this. It's quiet. It doesn't announce itself with screams or slammed doors. It unravels, one thread at a time. First, the pitch, the crown jewel they thought would make them legends, was pulled from the client docket. The company issued a terse statement about internal discrepancies and promised a review. Then came the suspension, swift and chilling, followed by the headlines. Words like plagiarism, fraud, breach of ethics began to circle their names like vultures. One of them tried to deny it on a private Slack channel. That message was leaked too. The project lead, once the golden boy of the department, was placed under formal investigation. His name no longer appeared on the board's quarterly update. His office went dark, then disappeared altogether. I heard later that he'd hired a lawyer, not to fight, but to negotiate. He knew there was no way out. Another team member lost her consulting gig with a major tech incubator. The offer was rescinded with cause. She didn't even get to clean out her desk. Security did it for her. And the third, the one who used to mock my silence the loudest, simply vanished. Her name disappeared from the mentorship roster. Her speaking engagements quietly canceled. Her inbox, once overflowing with admiration, grew emptier by the week. LinkedIn tells a story if you know how to read it. No new job titles, no updates, no humble brags about growth or resilience. Just static profiles that haven't changed in months. Posts from long ago about teamwork and hustle and passion now sit like forgotten tombstones. Once, those pages were shrines to their ambition. Now, they're just digital dust. Quiet reminders that the spotlight, once lost, rarely comes back. And still, the world keeps moving. Our industry did what it always does. It looked for the next name, the next face, the next story. And this time, it found mine. A feature ran in Techmark Weekly, then another in the Business Chronicle. Whistleblower of the Year, they called me. Not with pity, with respect. They told the story of a woman who said nothing while building everything, then let the truth speak in the room where she'd been erased. My name was printed in bold, across a glossy spread they couldn't avoid. It showed up in news feeds, slid into their periphery like a ghost they couldn't block. One of them was seen at a conference, alone, uninvited, standing at the back of a panel he once would have headlined. A colleague whispered that he kept checking his phone, but never got any new notifications. Another was spotted at a networking event, trying to rebrand herself, pitching a startup idea no one listened to. Her smile was tight. Her eyes scanned the room like she was expecting someone to call her out. No one did. No one had to. Because the silence around them had grown too loud. No sponsors, no students, no panel invites, no applause. Only the sound of emails that never came and opportunities that didn't materialize. At home, some things broke too. I heard rumors. One's partner left after the investigation, said she didn't sign up for disgrace, said she was tired of sharing a name now synonymous with theft. Another moved out of the city entirely. A fresh start, they said. But what does that mean when the internet remembers everything? What stayed with me most was a single encounter in a coffee shop downtown. I didn't plan it. I didn't even notice him at first. But he noticed me. I caught the moment our eyes met across the room. He froze. The color drained from his face like the life had been rinsed out of it. His jaw tensed, fingers fumbling around a takeaway lid that wouldn't seal. He didn't speak, just turned sharply and walked out, coffee still uncapped, shoulders drawn in tight as if the air itself had turned hostile. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Because I've learned the most devastating revenge doesn't require volume. It doesn't come in punches or slurs. It comes in presence, in existence. In knowing that when I enter a room, they can't pretend anymore. Their shame has shape now, and I wear it like armor they can't touch. I never raised my voice. I never pointed a finger. But I told the truth. And now, they have to live inside the silence they once weaponized against me. I could have stopped there, but I didn't. Because stories like mine don't end in silence. They begin a ripple. And someone, somewhere, needed to hear the truth I lived through. The cafe was quiet, save for the soft hum of jazz playing in the background and the occasional clink of porcelain cups on saucers. I sat by the window, a small round table to myself, sunlight slanting in just right, catching the swirl of steam rising from my coffee and the open laptop in front of me. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, as if asking permission from the silence before disturbing it. Then, I began typing. You called me an assistant. Here's the truth. That was the title. Bold, simple, true. The words that followed poured from a place that wasn't angry anymore. Just steady, resolved. I wrote about being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. Not because I lacked brilliance, but because I didn't perform it loud enough for those who demanded a show. I wrote about the meeting rooms where my ideas were scribbled on whiteboards, only to be erased when it came time to assign credit. I wrote about the jokes in the break room that always had my name at the end of a punchline. But most of all, I wrote about the silence, how it had been mistaken for weakness, how it had been mocked, trampled, ignored, and how it had watched, patiently, as the truth built itself like a tide waiting to rise. I spoke of women, of people of color, of quiet thinkers and introverts, of how often we are taught that we must roar to be heard, when sometimes the most deafening thing in the world is proof. It wasn't a scream, it was a mirror. I didn't name them, I didn't have to. The story stood on its own, clear, undeniable. I hit publish, not with shaking hands, but with calm fingers. And then I closed the laptop. By the time I finished my drink, the post had already begun spreading, shared first by women in tech circles, then by leadership coaches, then by mainstream media outlets. Within days, it was on the front page of every major platform, quoted in op-eds, and screenshotted on career advice threads across LinkedIn and Twitter. But the most powerful part wasn't the virality. It was the message that people remembered. You can steal my slides, you can steal my voice, but you'll never own my silence. That line echoed on podcasts, in conference keynotes, even in classrooms. A professor emailed me to ask if he could add it to his syllabus on ethics in innovation. A nonprofit requested to translate it into 3 languages for a mentorship initiative. A teenage girl from Brazil sent me a video, reading it aloud through tears, saying she finally understood that quiet didn't mean powerless. And then came the messages from inside the building I'd left behind. One intern wrote, "Thank you for showing me that silence can still be powerful." I replied simply, "Silence, when armed with truth, is never weak." It wasn't just a post, it was a beginning. I used the momentum to launch a platform, an online journal for underrepresented voices in the tech industry. Stories poured in, engineers, analysts, designers, assistants, people with brilliant ideas and no microphone. Until now, I partnered with an advocacy fund to create scholarships for first-generation female coders. I joined a board that pushed for mandatory intellectual property training in corporate onboarding programs. I wasn't trying to be a hero, I was just tired of watching brilliance wilt in the shadows. Somewhere along the way, a journalist coined the phrase, the quiet revolution. They said I had become its face. But I didn't want a face on a poster. I wanted a ripple, so I kept going, quietly, purposefully. I began mentoring young professionals, especially those who looked like I once did, tucked in the corner of the room, afraid their light might blind the wrong person. And every so often, I'd be invited to speak, not as a cautionary tale, but as evidence. At one event, after I finished my keynote, a woman approached me, her eyes glassy. "My daughter follows your blog," she said. She was about to quit her first job because she felt invisible, but then she read your piece. Now she's working on her first patent. I smiled. Not the kind of smile meant for cameras. The kind that fills you from the inane, slow and warm. I've learned that vindication is not the end of a story. It's a new foundation. I no longer chase applause. I no longer fear silence. I live in Seattle now. My mornings begin with birdsong and fresh notebooks. Sometimes I write. Sometimes I just sit with my coffee and listen to the world breathe. I walk more. I garden. I've learned to grow things without needing them to bloom on schedule. And once a month, I sit with a group of high school girls, future scientists, dreamers, builders. I ask them one question. If no one's watching, would you still dare to be brilliant? Their answers vary. but their eyes always carry fire. And I know then, legacy isn't a name on a plaque. It's how you light a torch and quietly pass it on. That's why I don't regret the silence. It gave me everything I needed: space, clarity, strength. The video ends just as the sunlight catches my face at the cafe window. I close the laptop, wrap my hands around the warm mug, and look out at people walking, cloud shifting, the ordinary beauty of a world that finally feels like mine. I smile, not because I won, but because I didn't have to shout to be heard. And I never will. If this story struck a chord with you, if you've ever been underestimated, tensed, or sidelined, drop a comment and let's talk. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and come back for the next chapter.